Chairman, you are now live.
Thank you. Councilor Michael Garcia, you with us? I know I just got a message that you're having problems with Zoom. Were you able to hear us?
It looks like he's trying to log in again.
All right.
Yeah, we're letting him in now.
Mr. Chair, I'm here. I'm just going to be on audio. It seems the video is causing challenges for my connection.
Okay, as long as you can hear us, I think we're okay. And we can hear you, we're good. All right, let's call Public Works and Utilities Committee for April 25th, 2022 to order. Can we have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Diaz?
Councilor Romero Worth,
I'm here.
Councilor Michael Garcia,
Present.
Councilor Chavez,
Here.
Councilor Lee Garcia,
Present.
and Chairman Rivera.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next is approval of the agenda. Any changes from staff?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it's been brought to our attention that item 7A is a duplicate of 7B and 7A should be removed from the agenda.
Very good. Any other changes?
No other changes, Mr. Chair.
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Motion to approve is amended by Councilwoman Romero Ware, second by Councilor Lee Garcia. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please, Ms. Diaz.
Councilwoman Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Councilwoman Chavez,
Yes.
Councilor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next is approval of the consent agenda. Any changes from staff?
No other changes, Mr. Chair.
All right, anything committee members would like to pull off for discussion tonight?
I'd like to just get a little more information on item C.
C,
Yes, C is in Charlie.
very good. Anybody else? Councilor Michael Garcia, I can't see you, so just chime in if you have something to pull.
Approve, Mr. Chair.
Very good, thank you. What are the wishes of the committee?
Move to approve consent as amended.
Second.
We have a motion to approve consent as amended by Councilor Michael Garcia, second by Councilwoman Chavez. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please, Ms. Diaz.
Councilwoman Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Councilwoman Chavez,
Yes.
Councilor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next is approval of the minutes from April 11th, 2022. Any changes from staff?
No changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
Any changes from the committee? Wishes of the committee?
Move to
Approve.
approve.
Second.
Motion for approval by Councilwoman Chavez, second by Councilor Michael Garcia. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please, Ms. Diaz.
Councilwoman Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Councilwoman Chavez,
Yes.
Councilor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We're on presentation informational items. First is City of Santa Fe Water 2021 Summary and 2022 Outlook. Mr. Jesse Roach, welcome.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen and get started. I'm sorry, I'm going to close my door. I just wanted to provide the committee with an overview of some of the things happening with water at the moment. I trust everyone can see my screen. Let me know if you can't. I need to move this thing. So we did just complete our annual report, and we included the executive summary in the packet. And I will include some of the key figures from the report in this presentation, but really, it's about a 22-page report. It's available on our website, and in many ways is written for members of this committee. So I encourage you, if you have the time, to take a look at it and let us know what we can do to make it more useful and how to improve it next year. In 2021, our total production for the city was just under 8,700 acre feet. And this map sort of shows where that water came from. Well over half of it came from BDD, so diverted from the Rio Grande. Almost a quarter of it came from the Santa Fe River, treated at the Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant. And then the remaining about 20% came from our two different well fields. This is how it looked on a monthly basis. So the light blue color at the bottom is the Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant. And then the dark blue above that is BDD, diversions from the Rio Grande, and then city wells in orange and Buckman wells in yellow. And then the gray line is how much we sold through meters each of those months as well. A couple things worth pointing out on this figure, we turned the Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant off for almost 7 weeks, from June well into July. And this was sort of a proof that we could serve the entire city during peak demand without that source of water. So this was a helpful sort of experiment. It's a helpful exercise that we went through that helps us understand how to do that should we ever need to. And then I do talk a lot about how we think about our river water, the Santa Fe River and the Rio Grande as our checkings account. We try and use that preferentially, and we try and save our well water for times of drought. And I think it's worth noting that even in 2021, which was a dry year, almost 80% of the water that we did treat and deliver to our customers came from the rivers, and the well production was about 20% and quite a bit below what we think our total sustainable ability to produce from those wells would be. And so we expect that water levels continued to rise in our wells and in our aquifers last year. On the reservoir storage side of things, we started the year with more water in storage, both on the Santa Fe River shown on the left and on the Chama system on the right than we ended up with. It's worth pointing out that these scales are very different. So we ended with over 12,000 acre feet of storage, either in Heron or Abiquiu, compared to less than 1,000 acre feet of storage on the Santa Fe River. So we really do have more than 10 times the sort of stored water of San Juan Chama water than we have in our local watershed. And in terms of looking forward to the next year, this chart on the left there's a lot going on in here, but it's a pretty neat chart that shows this is essentially water stored in the snowpack as from October through July. And the colors show historically, the green is the median. So where we would be and then the purple is the maximum, the red is the minimum, and different shading for different percentiles. But the black is what actually happened in 2021 and into 2022. And so in April, we were looking about median, and then we've fallen off since then. So we're hopeful that it won't be as dry of a year as it was last year, but with these winds and this dry weather that we're experiencing now, it's still not a great year on the Santa Fe River. But based on that information, we then make a plan on how we want to try and use our resources for the year. And this is our annual operating plan at this time. And this is for city and county combined, so it adds up to a bigger number. We do all this planning with the county because the BDD is a shared facility between the city and the county. And let's see, on the financial side of things, just trying to sort of take a snapshot of where we stand and where we're going and point out a few things that are on the horizon. You know, our cash balance, and this was as of almost 2 years ago now, was in the 55.4 million, and the outstanding debt at the same time was in the low 40 million range. And so I've tried to capture on this graph sort of our actual, so this is based on audited numbers, these three for fiscal year ending June 18, 19, and 20. And then projections that we do every year going out, in this case, to June of 2026. The blue bars are our revenues, are sort of in the $36-37 million range. The cash balance is the green line. And then our debt is the purple line on the bottom, and the cash expenditures in red. I guess just one thing to point out is that we have nearly $90 million in just 4 capital projects on the horizon. And we expect that those will draw down our cash reserves, and we probably will, or we're planning to bond some portion probably of the San Juan Chama return flow project. So those projections show our cash balance being drawn down and taking on some debt associated with these new projects. And just to sort of give an order of magnitude and list those projects, we have the Nichols Dam outlet conduit rebuild that's going to start in the next year or so. The construction estimates keep going up. It's around $19 million is the latest estimate we have. We're doing a big renovation at the Canyon Road plant on the order of $13 million. McClure will be a couple years out, similar to what we're doing at Nichols. So we're just estimating a similar amount. And then the San Juan Chama return flow project at $35 million. I think we're all aware of what's happening with inflation and supply chains and costs. And so these are tentative numbers. The Nichols number is the best. The rest of these could continue to rise almost every time we ask somebody for the latest estimate. An update on the San Juan Chama return flow project. We've certainly had presentations of multiple slides, but just the snapshot picture is that the idea here is to stretch our San Juan Chama water by returning some amount to the river just below the diversion, so that we can continue to make the same diversion with a much smaller release from upstream and save our stored water in that way. The status of that is that we did submit a return flow credit application with the Office of the State Engineer in November, and we're hoping by the end of this month, just in the next few days, that will actually be publicly noticed. We are in the NEPA process. We held 2 successful public scoping meetings last year in November. And then based on that information, we're refining our proposal for the actual NEPA analysis and targeting a NEPA document this fall. And there is also a lower Santa Fe River planning process underway as part of this whole permitting sort of process that we're going through, and that's being led by Santa Fe County, who is a partner in this return flow project. And then finally, on the design side of things, we received 4 responses to an RFP for an engineering design, and we are in the process of evaluating those. A couple other items to mention. Every April, the director of City of Santa Fe Water is required by code to provide a memo to the city manager recommending whether we should be in a state of water emergency. And we have recommended that we do not need, we are not in a water emergency this year. We previously presented to this committee the Santa Fe Water Resources Indicator, which was included in that memo as a potential pilot to used in future years instead of what's currently used as a comparison of operational demand and operational supply. According to all three of those methods, well, there's two methods. There's an administrative procedures method. We supplement that with staff estimates because there are some things about those administrative procedures that are a little out of date. But in either case, they actually come up with a surprisingly similar number that we do have plenty of space between what we could supply and what we expect will be the demand. And then the water resources indicator as a potentially a different way to do that going forward. We have our annual What's Up with Water public webinar occurring on Thursday, either at 9 a.m. or 7 p.m. So it's the same information twice. I encourage anyone to listen into that if you can. And also, recently did a presentation in a format called Pecha Kucha, where we basically have 20 images with 20 seconds each. And the idea of this presentation was to answer the question, do we have water for growth? Because I believe that is a question that you're often asked. So if somebody only has 15 seconds, you tell them yes. And if they have 7 minutes, then direct them to this video on our website, which I think is a very concise way of explaining all the things we're doing to continually answer that question. And then finally, I guess one thing just to point out that we are having a hard time finding engineers. We're creatively adapting to that and using some strategies pioneered by Director Wheeler. And I think we will have staff in the pipeline, but we are experiencing some delays. So if you hear anything that we're working on it, and things a little bit slower, but we'll be okay. And with that, I will stop sharing and stand for questions.
Thank you, Jesse, for the presentation. Any questions for Director Roach?
I see a couple hands.
I don't see any from committee members.
Counselor Garcia, actually, both Counselor Garcias have hands up.
All right, I can't see Counselor
I think-
but go ahead, Counselor.
Counselor Michael had his hand up first, so I'll go ahead and let him ask his questions.
All right, Counselor Michael Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilor Garcia. Thank you, Jesse. Really appreciate the update. I just got one quick question for you. And you had mentioned that you had sent a memo to the city manager saying there wasn't a water emergency for this year, but given we're barely finishing up April, it's the extreme drought around us has wildfires eating up our state alive. Is it possible to change that status? I mean, I'd hate for us to be with the mindset that there's no emergency, we're good, where I think we should be looking at the situation at hand and saying, there's not an emergency for the next 30 days, we'll reevaluate. Or what is that process? Maybe that is the next step. If you can help clarify, Director Roach, that would be fantastic.
Chairman Rivera, Councilor Garcia, thanks for the question. I think you have hit on one of the key elements that we're trying to pull out with the water resources indicator, and that is incorporating some level of the perception of drought and or perhaps fires in our region, in our area, in our county, in our state, into what we might want to tell, what we might want to ask or tell people to do. But I think this is something that we're developing in a process. And at the moment, we really just, following strictly according to code, we would calculate our operational demand and our operational supply and conclude that we're not currently in an emergency. I'm willing to stand by that, but I completely understand the intent of your question.
Okay, thank you. So the way it stands, it's we won't rescind that emergency memo. Is there a time where you might reconsider it? And the reason I ask is we're about to get into, I mean, folks are going to start their planting season. And I'd hate for us to get into a situation where folks do their planting and we get into a situation where we have a water emergency situation and people lose their crops. And I just want us to go into this summer diligently. I think evidence is there that we are in a drought. I think it's best for us to be proactive than reactive. And I don't know if we are going to be promoting any suggestions to community members in regards to water conservation. If I recall last summer, we did implement some measures where we at certain days, certain people were allowed to water, and maybe I'm mixing it up with another year, but again, I think sometimes the data is just not showing what the actual situation is. I mean, I don't know. I'm just a bit concerned that with using the language, we're not in a water emergency, when I think that's a bit misleading. But I appreciate the update, Jesse. I really do. And maybe this is something I can connect with you offline more about, just to learn more about the data and the process. With that, no other questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Director Rich.
All right, Councilor Lee Garcia. You're muted, Councilor.
And that mute button is vicious. I have a couple of questions, Director Roach, and just a lot of people come to me from the concern of water that's not being able to be accessed downstream of Santa Fe, south of Santa Fe. And so how does the return flow pipeline, the percentage of water that will take away from water being treated and sent down the Santa Fe River for people who have water rights farther south of the city? And in terms of people who are doing agriculture and people who are grazing cattle and they need these type of resources.
Chairman Rivera, Councilor Garcia, thanks for the question. And this is a question, it's a great question, and it's something we spent a lot of time looking at. And so I'm very happy, myself and my team are happy to talk more directly with you if you would like, but I will give you sort of the high level answer is that the San Juan Chama return flow project will take water that originated as San Juan Chama water and turn it to the Rio Grande. And so still a lot of the water that we treat and use is from other sources. And so that water will remain available for use either in non-potable reuse on our parks or for discharge to the lower Santa Fe River to help meet the needs of users downstream of the wastewater treatment plant.
Thank you for that answer. I also have a question, I guess, then in regards to, I hear a lot when you do your presentations about our well water is, our aquifer is our money in the bank, so to speak. And that's, I've heard that many, many times. And so if we are in a situation where we need to depend on that water, how long will it last us? I mean, especially with the size of our city and how it's growing.
Well, that's a great question also. I think one of the interesting things about how our city developed and grew and used our water resources is that in the mid-90s, we were using 13,000 acre feet a year of water, and now we're using more like 9,000. So we had a system at that time that could serve a much larger demand with fewer sources of water. And indeed, we're very fortunate at the moment that we could serve all of our water demand just with our wells for, I'm going to say, several years. We don't want to know. I mean, we hit those wells too hard in the 90s and early thousands, and the water level in those wells was dropping. And so we certainly can meet our needs just with wells for a day or a week or a month or even a year, but we don't want to put ourselves in that position. And so we're in good shape now, and we're watching the well levels come back up. And part of that water resources indicator that we've developed to try and help guide our seasonal conservation policy is looking at how hard we're hitting the wells. And so if we start to use them more, that indicator will start to reflect it, and we'd start asking people to use less water. Hopefully I answered that question. I'll let you clarify if I didn't answer it well.
No, that's fine. And I guess just, that this water resources just seems to be one of the biggest questions that's raised by constituents or people that live in the city. And, they see the growth, they see the buildings, they see the apartments, they see, you name it. And I know a lot can be said about conservation, and quite a lot can be said about, housing design and the steps that we're taking time and time again to save water and to ration water as the best that we can. But the majority of people come and they say, well, where are we getting the water from? And I'm glad that you have the presentation there. We can send them to take a look at that. I think that's a good thing. And so, again, it's something that I think, going back to Councillor Michael Garcia's concern, is that you see the drought around us. You see it's not raining like it used to in the past. We're not getting the snowpack that we have. And so it's a concern, and in the case that we would need to put the city on alert, then I think that's something that needs to be looked at. And that's just my 2 cents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Romero Worth, you unmuted.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think these are great questions, and questions I think as counselors we all hear a lot from the community, and ones that I think we've been trying really hard to answer, and they are sometimes you really have to spend a little time to understand our situation, our water supply system. I think that's one of the reasons why the presentation that Director Roach did about a week ago that he's offering, I would direct lots of people to it, because I think it helps answer these questions. And I think one of the concerns, that I've had since becoming a counselor is this disconnect between us looking outside and saying, hey, it didn't snow as much. Hey, it's not raining as much. We must be in a crisis. We must be having a problem. And on the other hand, if you look at our water resources, where we get our water and what our demand is, those two things are lining up in ways that say we are not in a crisis. Now, we know from our studies that in the future, we may have shortages in, 30 years, 25 years. What's the year? 25, 30?
Well, if we did nothing and the worst case scenarios were to be the ones that actually occur, it could be as early as next decade.
Yeah. And so, but recognizing that's why we're doing the water planning that we're doing. That's why we are in the permitting process for the return flow pipeline, which is an engineering solution. And that's why we are thinking all the time about what more we can do in water conservation, because these are all ways of continuing to meet the community's needs. And you have to plan for some of this stuff well in advance of needing the water. And I think the water resources indicator that we've had presentations on, that I believe even at the last meeting, Director Roach walked us through that, is one answer for developing what we want the community to do at varying drought levels. And so that model will give us a drought level. It will make a determination based on the data, what level of drought we're in, and then working with the county's Water Policy Advisory Board and the city's Water Conservation Committee, those two groups are going to come up with the responses. So if we're at drought level, let's say, what's the lowest one? Yellow?
Green.
Green.
The best. Yeah.
Well, or what's the next one up from green?
We sort of have red, orange, yellow, and then maybe light green and dark green. That's the idea, right?
Okay. So, if we're in green, we're probably pretty good. We should always be conserving. We should always, be valuing water as the important resource that it is. If we're in yellow, hey, that may be a place where we want to ask more of our residents, more of the people of the community. Don't do this, do this only on these days. So, and that will help with this disconnect, right? That, hey, it feels dry out there and we're not being asked to do anything. Now, we do have watering days, and we do have a fairly hefty budget of water conservation messaging all the time, asking people, to use this resource wisely, to not waste it, to be careful. And so that's kind of a constant, but I think this water resource indicator work is going to be very important for determining drought levels and what we are asking people to do in response to that drought level. And then the return flow pipeline is new work that we're doing to ensure that we have the water we need. It's in the permitting stages. And I think, to the question of downstream users, that's why that working group that you referenced, Jesse, in your presentation, the remind me what it's called, downstream users group.
The Lower Santa Fe River Planning. I don't know it off the top of my head either.
Yeah, so Lower Santa Fe River Planning Group. That work is to take a look exactly at this question of what kinds of mitigation strategies do we have to deal with the fact that the water that we actually own, we will be using in a different way to be more resilient for our water utility customers. And we're not taking water that isn't ours. We're taking water that belongs to us, that we have a legal right to. It has been enjoyed by people downstream, and now we're going to pull up the slack, so to speak, and use that water to make sure that we're getting, because it is our water, that we are making it stretch as far as we can. So, and there are things, I'm told, that can be done to mitigate some of the effects to the downstream users. But again, we're not taking water that doesn't belong to us. We're not taking downstream users' water and taking it for our own just because we can. We're taking water that we have a legal right to, and we're making it go further with this return flow pipeline. So I think these are conversations that we need to continue to have. It is complicated. There are answers. There is work being done. It's why we have the 40 and 80-year water planning cycles going on, because we need to be able to answer these questions well in advance of being in an actual crisis. And I guess the only thing I would say is, Jesse, the presentation that you're doing on, I think it's Thursday, What's Up with Water, that is a webinar. Will that be available on demand on your website?
Yes, it'll be recorded. We'll probably record both of them, and then whichever one, we'll put one of them up on the website, so that folks who can't make it on Thursday at either time could still listen to it after the fact.
Okay. Okay. So again, I think there's a lot going on here. Great questions. I think as counselors, we get asked them all the time. It is hard to understand some of this stuff and how it interconnects. And so it's great to have the opportunity to have the conversation. So thank you for coming in and talking to us. And I appreciate everybody's trying to get a handle on all this. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Michael Garcia, did you have an additional question?
I did, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Quick question, Director Roaches. This is, I guess, a Water 101 question maybe, but is precipitation needed to charge our aquifers? So I guess my question is, if it's not raining or snowing, we're not getting that precipitation, our aquifers aren't going to be charging as they should be. Is that correct?
Councilor Garcia, I would say that is correct. But one thing that is harder to understand because we don't see it is how slowly groundwater moves. And so these year-to-year variations kind of get worked out. So if it didn't rain for many years, we would start to see that. But it rains, it seeps into the ground, and it slowly is moving underground. And so the sort of interannual variations that we see all the time in our reservoirs are not things that we necessarily pick up very quickly when we look at the aquifers. So you are correct, but the time scale is long and slow, and so it's not something we would immediately notice.
Okay, but I guess my follow-up to that is our aquifers, when was the last time they were at 100%?
Probably when the first well was drilled. So the way groundwater systems work is in sort of a pre-development condition, there would be water recharging, mostly maybe at the mountain front and under the arroyos and flowing down into the water table, and then slowly moving down to places where it would discharge to the surface water again, either in springs or rivers. When you start to then put wells to extract some of this water, you start to change the way that water flow occurs. And so ever since we started extracting water from the aquifers, they've been a little bit different probably than they were before any wells were drilled. Another way to think about it is probably the overall storage of groundwater was being reduced into the early 2000s, and now it's coming back. We're using less than is being naturally recharging back into the space that we created as we pumped it.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. I guess from my perspective, I like to look at our reservoirs in regards to what's being produced by Mother Nature, what's being put into our system naturally. And when our aquifers are not being charged naturally and we're not at 100%, and it's gradually declining every year, I think that does cause some concern. So I if possible, can you send us data on our reservoir storage over the last 50 years and what that's looked like? I know that we just got some recent data where I don't want to misstate it, but it was extremely low. And it'd be interesting to see where we've gone over the last 50 years with our reservoir storage. I guess that a kind of follow-up question, since Councilor Lee Garcia brought it up in regards to the pipeline. The downstream users, just to clarify, their access to untreated water is going to go up. They will have access to water, but their access to untreated water is going to go down. Is that correct?
So I guess a couple things. The 50 years for our reservoirs, we certainly have it for 20 years. I'm not sure we have it for 50 because we were trying to see how far back we could go with the water resources indicator. I easily have it, the reservoir storage for the last 20 years, but might not have it before that easily accessible. In terms of the lower Santa Fe River water users, I think that the system, my sort of conceptualization of the system was that there were some springs down low that flowed, that provided some water for agriculture upstream of the La Cienega Santa Fe River confluence. And then below that, most of the water came from La Cienega. We have changed that system over the past, 20, 50 years to one that is mostly dominated by a relatively constant supply of water from our water treatment plant. And we're talking about reducing that amount that we discharge to the Santa Fe River in proportion to how much San Juan Chama water we are using. So we think of it as water that we sort of paid to bring into the watershed is the water that we're peeling back off.
Thank you, Director Roach. I appreciate that. But I guess my question wasn't answered. So downstream user, let's say they were used to getting 10 acre feet per year of water, untreated water. That is going to go down, correct? Because it's that we're pulling now from stream. We're going to be pumping out treated water. And that 10 acre feet is not going to be 10 acre feet of untreated. There's going to be a percentage of treated water in that. And I guess my question to that, and I don't know if we have the science to figure it out using that example of 10 acre feet. Out of that 10 acre feet, and we give estimate of how much of that is going to be treated water. Is it going to be, we're pumping out 8 acre feet of treated water and one acre of untreated. And I know you can't do that because they're going to mix. I guess my concern for the downstream users is the majority of their water going to be treated water versus natural untreated water that they're used to receiving?
So I would say that the majority of the water in the lower Santa Fe River for the past decades to many decades below our water treatment plant has been effluent, at least to the confluence with La Cienega Creek. So in your example of 10 acre feet, if there was 10 acre feet available before the city was in play, then there's probably 10 times that has become available through effluent, and now we're going to peel some of that back. And this stuff gets pretty complicated, and it's hard to sort of explain it without looking at a map and sitting together. So I would very much welcome if you have the time to sit with me or my team and talk through these things. But I will also say that there is a pretty detailed. We're working on a lot of the hydrology of the lower Santa Fe River as we prepare for the permitting process and NEPA. So a lot of the questions that you have may be answered in the next 6 months or so with some of the work that we're doing. But if the answers are not satisfactory that I'm trying to give now, more than happy to sit with you at any point and try and explain them further.
Okay, thank you, Director Roach. And as you said, it's complicated. Definitely not a water expert like you, and I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around this whole process. So thank you. I really appreciate you trying to put it in layman's terms for me, just because I think sometimes that's the easiest to digest and understand, especially for me. And I just appreciate you kind of giving more of a thorough overview of and responses to the questions I had. I definitely appreciate it. No more questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Roach.
Thank you, Counselor. Councilwoman Romero-Worth, did you have a follow-up question?
Well, not a question as much as a comment. I guess, one of the things that I think we're going to need to look at as a city is something called Aquifer Storage and Recovery. And that may be, the next thing we have to do, because from what I understand, we're going to have wet years and dry years. And when we have wet years, I think we do want to make sure that we are capturing that water. And one way to do that is to put it into the ground, into the aquifers, so that we can draw on it in the dry years. And that may be, kind of the next thing we need to do. And as if we look at the city's history of how we've met the water needs, we've done a variety of things, including, bring on the BDD facility, bring on the well fields. So, and now we're in the permitting process for the return flow pipeline so that we can fully utilize our San Juan Chama water and make sure that we're not wasting any of that. So to me, the next thing we're going to need to do is, and I don't know, I'm sure the water division may have things maybe even prior to this, but to me, I think we've got to get serious about aquifer storage and recovery. And there's also much more we can do in water conservation. We've done a lot with residential. There's more to be done in commercial. And that is some of the work that's going on with the Water Conservation Committee. And so I think there's a lot we can still do to be more resilient and to, again, use this resource very wisely, very carefully, because we need to have the water this community needs to thrive and live. So just thought I'd throw that out there, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Director Roach, with regards to, just to follow up on Councilor Michael Garcia's question, the EPA doesn't allow us to put untreated water into the river flow below the treatment plant. Is that correct?
Chairman Rivera, I would say that that's a correct statement. And maybe Ms. Director Jones would like to take it, but that we do have standards to which we must treat that water in order to discharge it to the river, and also standards that we must treat it to use it for turf irrigation.
So currently, either yourself or Director Jones, all the water going downstream is treated effluent, basically, correct?
I would say all the water that goes out of the treatment plant and goes downstream is treated. There's also storm flows. There's other water that can enter the river system that wouldn't be treated effluent, but on a day when it's not raining, before you hit spring systems downstream, all the water would be in that location between the treatment plant and the next set of inflows would be treated effluent.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. And then, you gave your outlook on water, and I'm glad it's looking pretty good, but I think we send mixed messages when we talk about water here, but then we cancel things like the fishing derby. And not that I disagree, I think we probably need to cancel it because I do have water concerns just like everybody else, and I hear it from everybody else. But do you think we're sending mixed messages when we say the two things that we're saying?
I think that's a hard question. It's a policy question, and I support. I mean, I think we do send a little bit of a mixed message. And the decision, not to have the fishing derby because of low reservoir levels and low rain is one I can support. And also, we could send, to me, is more of a timing issue than that. I mean, we have decided we will bypass a certain amount of water to the river, but we might not have the river inflows on the date of the fishing derby to actually support the amount of water that I believe the biologists would want us to. So I'm not expert on the fishing derby, but I understand your point that maybe there's a little bit of a mixed message here if we say we're fine, but we don't have enough water for the fishing derby.
Yeah, so just I think we need to be careful on our messaging. And, currently out meeting with constituents, I've heard the comment that you can't drink water rights. You can't put water rights into a cup and drink them. So I think we've had this conversation before about trying to explain in layman terms how paper water rights translate to water in your cup or water at your faucet. And I think that's a hard thing to grasp for a lot of people, including probably some of the counselors, some of us. And I don't know what the best way to get that messaging out, but I think when you try to explain water rights when you're building an apartment complex, it's hard to grasp the idea of how paper water rights turn into actual water at the tap. So just keep that in mind as well. All right, any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, I think, Director Roach, correct me if I'm wrong, don't you on the website have a presentation by our City Attorney Marcos Martinez on that question of paper water rights? It was there, I thought, at one point.
We had it there at some point. I would have to look and make sure it's still there.
That might be something worth sending out to the committee, because I know because of, it is the time of year when people are meeting with constituents, and these questions do come up. It might help to refresh us all and also have something to point to, because I know we did have City Attorney Marcos Martinez, Assistant City Attorney, I think is his title, discuss that very point at the Next Generation Water Summit last year as part of a panel. And I think it might help us just to refresh. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yes, if we can make sure that that's still up, maybe along with the presentation now that you just referenced, I think that would be a good idea. Thank you, Director. No further questions or comments? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We are on to our consent agenda, and the only item pulled was item C. Ms. Diaz, can you read that into the record, please?
Request for approval of amendment number 1 to the on-call professional services agreement 19-0750, increasing compensation in the amount of $500,000 to the total amount of $1 million exclusive of NMGRT for on-call professional engineering design services for numerous projects funded by the state legislature, NMDOT, FHWA, and city impact fees. Miller Engineering DBA, Sauder Miller and Associates, and that is Romela Gorioso Mas.
All right, and Councilor Lee Garcia, you pull this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, I guess, and I'm pretty sure this is something related to probably hiring city engineers. But how long are we going to continue to outsource that? And are we looking at having engineers hired by the city to address these issues?
Chairman, Councilor Lee Garcia, thank you so much for that question. Actually, it is not our standard process to do internal design. The city has never, well, hasn't for quite some time had engineering professional services on staff to that extent to be able to do all the design work for our extensive road projects. these are for the trail projects, the road projects, like those big design packages that you'll see. And so we don't normally do those in-house. There are engineering positions in Public Works, actually two at this point that we think will fill with engineers. But no, these types of services are always done by professional services, and we use a number of different companies with on-call contracts to perform this for us. And their services, as the memo says, are paid by the project funds because they are part of these big projects.
Okay, thank you. I guess that was just something that was on my mind and clarification, but other than I have no more questions, and I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion for approval by Councilor Lee Garcia, second by Councilwoman Romero Worth. Any other questions? Councilwoman Chavez, I can't see if you have a hand up, but I know you unmuted. So did you have a question?
No, I did not.
Okay, thank you. We have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Diaz.
Councilwoman Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Councilwoman Chavez,
Yes.
Councilor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you. That concludes our consent agenda. We're on to item 8, no action items for discussion. Item 9 is introduction of legislation.
Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Romero Worth.
I'm prepared to introduce this item if you're ready for that.
Yes.
Okay, so this is consideration of a resolution adopting the City of Santa Fe's fiscal year 2022-2023 operating budget and organizational chart. The sponsors are the mayor and myself, and the staff on this is our finance director, Mary McCoy. And we are introducing this tonight, and it will be in front of the governing body on Wednesday night.
All right, and I assume it's here tonight because of timeliness issues?
Yes.
Okay.
And it had to be in front of it had to be introduced by one of the 3 council committees. Couldn't be by the finance committee at a budget hearing, apparently.
Okay. All right, thank you. I don't believe we can ask questions. It's just the introduction of the legislation. So thank you, Councilwoman Romero Worth. On to item 10, no executive session. 11, no matters from staff. I'm sorry.
No matters from Public Works, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Director Jones.
Mr. Chair, just a brief comment. I think there was some great discussion today, definitely around some complex item. And so just make sure it wasn't missed, but we're absolutely willing to meet with any counselor, kind of go in, offer tours of the facility. I would say if you've already seen it, I would see it again. We do this all day, every day, and these conversations, they move, they develop. So the information is real time. And so again, we just want to make sure that everyone knows that we're available to meet, to answer your questions, to go in depth, to try to gain as much understanding and confidence from the governing body. So we are available to do that. Just wanted to state that. No other matters, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Jones. Matters from the committee. See none. Matters from the chair. So I will remind everybody that we will at some point here, probably in hopefully June and July, have some of our meetings at the facilities that we're talking about every meeting. So up at Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant in that area, maybe at Audubon or in that area, and then have a tour of the reservoirs, the watershed, the Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant. We've had meetings, I think, at water as well, and then at wastewater. So we will, and including BDD, I think, if we can get out there. So we'll try to get that done as we've done in the past, and it'll give everyone an opportunity to really view those areas and be able to ask more in-depth questions if needed. Also, our next meeting, Monday, May 9th, Ms. Mihalcik did ask if we could, on a trial basis, have the meeting in person. I think they're thinking the governing body meeting on the following Wednesday would be an in-person, so they want to use us as a trial period for, or a trial session for prior to governing body, so which I've agreed to. Stay tuned. We'll see if they're actually ready for it or not, if it's going to be a hybrid model or if it's going to be a full live in person, and more details to come. So just be on the lookout for some of that. So
Mr. Chair, what was the date of that again?
May 9th, our next meeting.
May 9th. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So again, be on the lookout for more details with that. All right, with that, we are adjourned. Again, our next meeting Monday, May 9th. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.